and if you, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Please take the floor, and I would say make use of the brilliant minds that shared here with us. We're 118 people already in the call, and I'm very glad and very happy to have you, Brian, today. And I'm really looking forward very much to hear your perspectives, but also your experience, and also maybe to see what the role of the research managers can be in it, but also how the mental well-being of research managers in academia as well can be actually empowered. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for the introduction to speak today here for the audience of research managers, and I'm very glad that so many people have turned up. Firstly, I'd like to kind of just give some background about where I come from, and that I studied mechanical engineering in Ireland in the 1990s in 2 different universities, and then I came to Europe, to Germany first in 1998, where I worked for Hewlett-Packard for 2 years. And after kind of 2 years, I decided to do PhD, so also in mechanical engineering and nanotechnology at the ETH Zurich, with postdoc in chemistry in Geneva. And after that, I moved to an institute in Germany, the Institute for Bioprocessing and Analytical Measurement Techniques in Bad Heiligenstadt, so a small institute in a relatively small regional town. And I was there for 10 years as a Marie Curie Fellow and also as group leader. And during this time, I got involved in the Marie Curie Alumni Association, firstly as chair of the German chapter, and then as chair of the association itself. And kind of in that time, I began dealing with a lot of these topics, not just mental health, but researcher career development and so on, and building those sort of networks. So after that time, I moved on to work as a research manager at the University of Edinburgh, managing a Marie Curie project again. And also after that time, I moved to TIB, which is the German National Technical Library in Hanover. And I was managing the REMO cost action, of which I will speak a lot today, for 4 years between the end of 2020 and the end of 2024. And I'm currently at the Hochschule Bielefeld, where I am running a postdoc program where we have about in total about 50 postdocs, not at the moment, but in total, and many of whom are doing industry academia projects. So I think I'm also involved in SciLink, and SciLink is a non-profit organization based in the Netherlands that is focused on research and training for researcher career development. And within this work for SciLink, that we are in a part of the Pattern project, and Pattern is a project for providing training on responsible research and innovation. This was a topic that was introduced by the European Commission as part of Horizon 2020, and it's how all of the, well, my translation is all of the topics in research that relate to research impact and engagement with society, such as open access, open science, gender equality, gender dimension, engagement, public science communication, governance, education and thinking, ethics and integrity. And these are kind of many of the more socially oriented topics within research, but also the topics that engage with society. And Pattern is developing training in many of these topics. For example, EARMA is also part of a module of Pattern that's concerning research integrity and ethics. And there is kind of many trainings on open access, fair data management, citizen science, research integrity, gender non-discrimination, inclusion in research, science communication, dissemination and exploitation results, and also mental health management and leadership. In the last position is where we are working over the last 3 years. We have developed some training. There's a link for all of the Pattern trainings here. as well as that we have also produced some online trainings on responsible research supervision, thriving, surviving as an international postdoc, researcher mental health advocacy, this workshop, and then also PhD careers, how to build transferable skills and address career insecurity. So these are also available on the Pattern Projects directory. Today that we will use Padlet to gain some feedback. I think there's the chat, but there's also within Padlet that we have a range of questions. Maybe I can put it into the, if I can do it like this, I can also put it into the Teams chat so that it might be easier to access. So here is the link to, and so this means that we can, I have started some questions that you can contribute to, but you can also raise your own questions because we have a very large audience, and hopefully that because of how we are doing it with recording, that it probably we won't start so much through the talk, but we will leave time at the end for a lot of discussion. So I think with the Padlet, it is also possible to add to the conversation, and kind of it's something that I will work through afterwards as well as during the talk. Firstly, I would start with the Mentimeter question. So here is kind of the link. I can see if I can find on my own. And so this is here. The Menti question can be accessed in 1 or 2 words. What is the biggest, often unspoken mental health challenge facing your research teams today? And I can move that to here so that we can see it in the screen. And I think that we see, so burnout is the main problem that has been has been mentioned so far. Employment precarity, mental load, overload, frustration, burnout, and as 2 words, power abuse, anxiety, stress, frustration. So I think this is quite indicative of also what we saw during Remo, and I think this is something where kind of work overload, where the demands of work are greater than the resources that we have to do the work. And this is kind of for researchers, but probably even more for research managers. This is a question. And I will switch back to here to kind of describe my own story of how I started out kind of on mental health. That when I was chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, in some ways you're like a magnet for researchers who have problems. And I was very often approached by early career researchers, postdocs, PhD students about issues within their research environments, with their supervisors, and to a large extent, having this great fellowship was, for me personally, was a great thing. I really enjoyed my time as a Marie Curie fellow, but I could see that many people had this great opportunity, but this was being hindered by problems, very often problems with regard to communication and expectations within research, and also related to international mobility. And so this was something that we decided within MCAA was a topic that we should cover. So I looked within our kind of network to see where there were capacity to be expert on this topic. In the picture, we see kind of Gabor Kishmihok, who is my colleague at TIB Hanover, but Gabor Kishmihok was at that time, he was leading a Marie Curie doctoral network at the University of Amsterdam. And what really interested me about this work was that he had implemented training for both the PhD candidates and the supervisors within the doctoral network. And so this was something as as a research manager, researcher, as he was at the time, that he found a way to do something effective within his control, within his work to deal with problems within that network, the doctoral network that he was running. And this was, I also found Francisco Gonzalez had set up a social startup to offer online counseling for internationally mobile researchers in their own language. So I think this was something that really interested me. But we also reached out to experts from outside the association. And the first thing we did was, apart from the sessions at our own conference, was to apply for a session at the Euroscience Open Forum 2018 in Toulouse on raising awareness of researcher mental health. And this was within a few weeks after the conference itself. Two of our speakers were interviewed in Science and Nature. One was a counsellor at Trinity College Dublin, and the other was a researcher from the University of Ghent, who had published probably the definitive paper on researcher mental health in the last 20 years. And this was had got a lot of attention, but I think that we could see this was a very big issue, and that also the session itself had a very high attendance, was really packed, and had it was at the end of the last day of full day of talks, and so it was quite a lot, and just before the ESOF party, but I think we still had a big audience, so we could see this was a very big topic. And so we also reached out very much to other researcher organizations, particularly to Eurodoc, who had also seen quite a lot of the same issues and were also reacting to it. I know that Matthias Schreien, who was now a research manager at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, ULB in Brussels, was then a doctoral candidate, and he's in psychology, and he was the contact person at Eurodoc, and they had also been working with the European University Association Council on Doctoral Education on this topic. Matthias Björnmalm from Marie Curie Alumni Association had been interviewed by Nature in the same year, and he's now the Secretary General of CESAR, so an association of technical universities in Europe. So that we also submitted a session to the VITE conference. The VITE is a non-profit organization in the UK focused on researcher career development, and this was accepted, and that we also ran that together with Matthias Schreien from Eurodoc and other members from the Marie Curie Alumni Association. So as good researchers, the first thing that we did was to look and see what is the evidence behind the researcher mental health and mental health in academia. And the World Health Organization defines work-related stress as the response that people may have when presented with work demands and pressures that are not matched to their knowledge and abilities and which challenge their ability to cope. The International Labour Organization notes that workplace well-being relates to all aspects of working life, from the quality and safety of the physical environment to how workers feel about their work, their working environment, the climate at work, and work organization. So this has a lot about the demands and pressures that we face and the resources that we have to face these work demands. But as I said before, Katja Levesque published probably the most the highest impact paper on researcher mental health that has ever been published. I think that was published in 2017, and she did a study she did a survey of PhD candidates in Flanders, and showed that for 12 questions that the answers to the percentage of PhD candidates that felt under constant strain or answered yes to these questions was 2 to 3 times higher than for a comparison control group within the highly educated general population. So that I think it was quite clear this was basically the same sort of survey that she had been doing for other populations for many years, and this was something that really stood out as a very, very high prevalence of stress that is in some ways comparable with people who work in the health system or in army or in these sort of careers, rather than not really fitting to the actual need for kind of PhD candidates to feel stress. So here's a close-up of the same slide, but I think this is this kind of got a huge response on social media, although I don't think Katja Levesque is on social media in that way, but I think this is something that was kind of really, it had probably the highest impact, it's the second highest impact on social media of any paper published within 2017. Then when we looked at kind of beyond kind of the evidence, then I was also quite interested in a paper that was published by Inga van der Weyden and from the University of Leiden. And that Inga did the same survey as Katja Levesque in Ghent, but for the context in Leiden. But what interested me most of all is what she said, what the conclusions that she drew about what should be done is kind of to appoint independent psychologists for PhD candidates, to establish a supervision team, that there should be career coaching for both non-academic and academic careers, including transferable skills, supervisor training for both new and experienced supervisors, including a focus on identifying mental health problems and cross-cultural communication to provide transparent requirements for PhD candidates to meet, and independent PhD mentoring groups, frequent monitoring of the well-being of PhD candidates, and to run institutional surveys to assess the extent of the problem. We also got in touch with Susan Guthrie, who had been hired by or commissioned by the Royal Society and the Wellcome Trust to do a literature survey of the evidence of mental health and research environments that higher education staff, so not just academics, but all staff, report worse well-being than those in other types of employment. That the majority of university staff find their jobs stressful compared to high-risk groups. PhD candidates face specific challenges, high work demands and work-life conflict, low job control, poor support, or often poor support, exclusion from decision-making, and that academics hide their mental health conditions. That job insecurity is a big issue, and that's not just an issue for researchers, but also for research managers. Gender is a key factor in mental health and academia. Spending more time on research is associated with reduced stress. So it's not the work itself, it's very often the work conditions. Poor well-being can impact the productivity of researchers. The impact of stress and job satisfaction of researchers is unclear. Evidence on the effectiveness of mental health interventions is limited, and I think this was something that we very much concentrated on. What are the interventions? And also on the other side, that there should be research funding for studying mental health interventions in academia. We also looked very much at the Max Planck PhD survey, which was run by the Max Planck PhD Net, a network of doctoral candidates in the Max Planck Society in Germany. So they have very, very many. I think that the survey had over 2,000 responses, so it gives relatively good statistics. So you can see very much that there's kind of between the disciplines, there's small differences. You see for German citizens, EU citizens, and citizens of the European Union, or citizens from outside the EU, that you see kind of worsening conditions depending on whether kind of how secure you are in German society. So that the Germans have the best well-being, and the people from outside the EU have less, and this can be related to fitting into society, but also fitting into the research culture within the country. Very clear is that kind of there is a differential between men and women, with kind of women experiencing higher anxiety than men who are more comfortable. But I think that this then also at the very kind of right-hand side, you see first year, second year, third year, so that the longer that people are working in this, that the worse that things get. Once we looked at these, we looked at what are the actions that can be taken, and we also returned to see, kind of took some inspiration from Jana Lasser, who was the speaker of the Max Planck PhD Net at that time, when she was doing her PhD at the Max Planck Society in Göttingen. That there was a big kind of scandal in German academia when a researcher, who was working at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, was accused of bullying, and her kind of main topic was empathy. And I was really, this was a big story, but I was really impressed by Jana Lasser's response to this, which was very fitting, and that she advocated for changes to the research system with regard to how PhD candidates within the Max Planck Society are supervised, how they're kind of that they should be, and how they defend their theses, so that there should be a thesis advisory committee and how to disconnect their employment from just working for one supervisor. So this is very much, it was very, very evidence-based, so in position paper on power abuse and conflict resolution. So we started working together mainly with early career researcher organizations, working from the bottom up. But so it's the Marie Curie alumni, Eurodoc, and so on, Young Academy of Europe. But we also included, for example, Vitae from the UK, and EURAccess, which is is an organization which aims to kind of at the national bridgehead level translate European policies into action within institutions, and very often is not only concerned with international offices, but has a special connection to international mobility and international offices. So in this way, that we had a relatively direct connection to the research management system within Europe, and really we had several EURAccess bridgehead coordinators were on our management committee of the REMO cost action, so that once we were setting up a cost action for networking, I think this provided really good input from national level into how our network was set up. So we set up a cost action. A cost action is not directly a European Commission kind of funding line, but it does receive support from the European Commission indirectly through the Cost Association. And we chose this as a very good way to set up activities, awareness raising, but also to build a network where we could gather evidence, where we could try to advocate for changes to policy. And so that we were looking to achieve changes at a policy level, at the institutional policy level, as well as at the individual level, be that researchers, research managers, or practitioners, coaches, kind of who are running kind of interventions for institutions. So that we had a lot of activities, such as wrote a manifesto within the first year. We organized many conferences. We had 3 training schools for ambassadors, and we also published many policy briefs for different countries within Europe. And when I was presenting during this project, that very often, if you're presenting to an audience, they want to know what the interventions are. And this is the main focus of this talk today, is what interventions we found within this project, and kind of which ones we might miss, and kind of what kind of the research management community thinks about this topic. And I think I can see from the attendance today, this is something that is considered hugely important. I can also say that when I was Back in 2019, I attended the EARMA training for early career research managers or similar, and Olaf Svenningsson made a talk at that training directly about research manager mental health and his own personal experiences, but what we can expect of our institutions and how we can work to make them a better place, but also to safeguard our own mental health. And I think I already presented. I think the first person we asked to present in our webinar series was Inge van der Weyden from the University of Leiden, because she focused a lot on the interventions that should be carried out. And kind of when I'd look at I did a survey of the main categories of interventions that we dealt with. I think direct counseling support, peer support, community building, professional training and skills development, ambassador and capacity building programs, which was one of the interventions that we were developing, mental health first aid, international offices and onboarding and the role they play particularly for international researchers, but not just onboarding can also be for within a country, how you are integrated within a team, within a department, within the institution as a whole. Researcher assessment perform, supervisor and leadership development, research integrity and safety structures, whistleblowing, institutional change initiatives and research culture, and data collection in the evidence base. So I think because, most of us were not coming from a background in psychology, that we tried to really kind of integrate feedback from counseling services. And this can be difficult because people working in counseling services are not always academics. And so to participate in a cost action, very often people, the typical cost action can go beyond academia, but it very often has a very academic focus where you will publish papers together or similar. Whereas I think we're really very glad to have the head of a counseling service who was very active within the network. And Joan Camilleri from the Counseling Services Unit of the University of Malta made many contributions to our work and was kind of really a great support for our work and published this paper on, but many other things within our network. So this was, I think, was not our main focus to tell counselors what they should do, but we were glad to have feedback from a counseling service. We dealt with many psychological teams. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I think that kind of burnout is the first one that I put on the list, and I think this was the one that was was coming out of our mentee, and it's something kind of how to to prevent occupational burnout in an academic context. I think the webinar that we had on imposter syndrome had even more attendees than this one. So it had about over 200 attendees. So I think this was something that we saw that this was a big topic. I think that we had a webinar on kind of PhD coaching and how to set that up from two PhD candidates, two twin sisters who were working on that in their own research and had developed this PhD coaching kit themselves, and also had to set boundaries and to develop resilience. And so resilience in the context of mental health is some way, if an institution says you should develop resilience, they're kind of like outsourcing the responsibility for your mental health to yourself. But I think it's also important to develop professional working culture, and setting boundaries is one way to say no to work overload and how to represent yourself at work so that you do not take too much responsibility onto your own shoulders. And I think this is also quite important, not just for researchers, but for research managers, because I think it's one way to really define what your work is and kind of what you're going to do, and not just to take on an overload of work. We had a lot of mentoring programs. I kind of, particularly kind of EURAXIS had 2 different mentoring programs, kind of one for international researchers coming to Europe run by EURAXIS Bulgaria, as well as the Researchers Beyond Academia mentoring program run by EURAXIS Spain. The Marie Curie alumni also had 2 mentoring programs, one focused on career development, MCA Academy, and the Referent initiative, which was focused on peer mentoring, specifically for mental health. We also work together with the Autonomous University of Barcelona, who are running a program called the Third Half, which combines physical activities with networking activities and is provided to doctoral students as part of their the credits that they have to collect to complete their PhD, that they have to do a certain amount of lectures. So this is one that creates communication among the doctoral community within the university. And I think this was something that a researcher, Ana Muro Rodriguez, had been quite active. It was organizing, and that she really contributed as an academic to setting up this program and to making it work. And then this was something that we saw that it could be transferred to many other universities of in the same way. We also saw many mentoring programs that were set up maybe by a research manager who works together with an external consultant to set up a support group, a mentoring program. And kind of in 2024, in 1 month after another, we had from the UK, Fruni Panayidou was working together with Benjamin Priest to set up a mentoring program in London. And Johanna Stadelbauer, who runs the postdoc support office of the University of Graz, set up a peer networking mentoring program together with Yasmin Dolak-Struss, who I first got to know when she was the Marie Curie national contact point for Austria. So I think this was set up kind of by 2 research managers within a university, which is, I think, is kind of very often when I saw people doing something within a university, that was very often the research managers. I know that I won't speak too much about the EARMA Academy mentoring program, but this exists as kind of a lifelong learning initiative to enable continuous professional growth, networking and best practices exchange, and builds a robust platform for sharing knowledge and collaboration. And I know that this is something that within the EARMA and research manager community is also important. And it's kind of the role that associations play in doing this is very important. And EARMA is the Association for Research Managers. So I'm also partly involved in the Peer Power project, which is an Erasmus Plus project focused on peer mentoring and well-being support for early career researchers. It's kind of run by TIB in Hanover, along with Seiling, Rumo, the ULB in Brussels, and I'm probably forgetting some partners, but we will train 50 plus ambassadors and create 50 plus peer communities with big KPIs and kind of upgrade. We will also be kind of e-learning kind of content created, and there is kind of, we will work with over 10 universities to adopt a framework. I think coming up very soon is kind of our 2 events. I think there's the Peer Power Psychological First Aid pilot training, and that starts, I think that there's 2 focus groups on the 22nd of April and the 28th of April, and there's access to training materials from today till the 20th of April. So if you want to sign up for this, I will put the links the links are available on the screen. And there's also a Peer Power Hackathon for co-creating sustainable researcher communities that will take place at the beginning of June. And so I will see if I can get the link. I can put them into the chat. And then if you would like to copy link, if you would like to sign up, you are very welcome. And this is really kind of the project started last September and will run until 2028, I believe. And then I think that there's also kind of there was really kind of one of the big focuses is on kind of professional training and skills development, and very often for early career researchers is kind of the career insecurity associated with being an early career researcher is quite high. That society has invested a lot of money in the education of these of researchers, but that the career pathways are not always very clear, particularly when you come to a turning point, like at the end of PhD, and kind of the knowledge that not all PhD candidates will make a career in academia. And so I think this is something that I was asked to make a presentation for Marie Curie doctoral network recently, and kind of this is how to build transferable skills and address career insecurity, as well as many of the activities that we had during REMO. So I think this is definitely, it's also for research managers to develop the skills that we need, and the kind of the recognition of these skills within our institutions is quite important. We ran 3 ambassador training schools in France, run by Stéphanie Gauthier, and these were this is one of the great opportunities of running a cost action is you can run training schools, and we made these about the ambassador program. And one of the most interesting interventions, particularly for research managers, was mental health first aid. And this was suggested to us by Olga Vedenskaya, who was then a researcher and has now moved to working in outside academia, and Hendrik Huthoff, who was then running a doctoral program at the University of Jena. And I think from this webinar, I got the understanding of how once you decide to run training for a mental health first aid program, you get all of the people from within that institution who are open to supporting mental health within the institution into one room, and you get them to work together in a training on how to support the institution, but how to support each other, and this helps to prevent them from becoming accidental counselors, because as a research manager, you are not an expert on mental health, and you cannot be expected to be a mental health expert. But with this training, you learn how to deal with situations as they arise and how to build a network of support within the university. And I think this was something that kind of from this webinar that we ran, I began to understand how research managers can really help make an institution work, and kind of given the right support from the leadership of the institution. Also, we worked quite a lot with international offices and with EURAXESS. That kind of EURAXESS and the national coordinators were quite a great support from a high level, putting us on the agenda of European Commission meetings, so that we could reach policymakers in the first place. Because very often you can write the nicest policy brief, but if it never reaches the people the policymakers that you're targeting, it won't get there. But the minute that you actually know the person and that you have a direct personal relationship with them, it makes things a lot easier. And I think this was what EURAXESS did for us. But it was also the EURAXESS national coordinators invited us to their national network meetings, so that to work with, particularly with the international offices in Germany, it's the international offices mainly in the network, and so that we could really get access to a national research system, mainly most people who attend a national meeting of EURAXESS are research managers within their institutions. So I think this was quite useful for us, and kind of with onboarding, I think this is for whatever level of your career a good start is half the battle. And the minute that you really if an institution gets onboarding right, it kind of helps the functioning and the integration of new employees to a great extent. So I think that we had a contribution from Millie Losmanova from the University of Chemistry and Technology in Prague, presented at our conference, as well as made a podcast for Pride, that's Professionals in Doctoral Education Network, and that she's a research manager in Prague, and she, working with her colleagues, she made kind of a study of kind of onboarding and how you can apply lessons from non-academic employers. And this is kind of really to support the integration of new PhD candidates. One of our kind of, when we were developing our manifesto, one of the big topics that we identified was the role of research assessment in academia, and it was at exactly that time that the consultation around the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment for adopting COARA was started. I took part in those consultations, but we also reached out to Karen Stroobans, who was involved in running those consultations for the European Commission, or I think the European Universities Association was also involved to a great extent with Stefan Bergmans in setting up this consultation, and kind of how research assessment frames the whole of research culture and what people concentrate on and within an academic system. And if you only concentrate on kind of quantitative metrics with regard to publication and research funding, then you may neglect many other diverse contributions within the research system. So I think this is something that we were really quite interested in contributing to and to support. We looked at the topic of research supervision. Firstly, I will present the results. This are the results from the Max Planck PhD-Net survey, which show kind of anxiety and depression as a function of satisfaction with research with supervision. And kind of it's quite clear from left to right, you can see kind of a huge change between the researchers who are very satisfied with their supervisor or their supervision and those that are very dissatisfied. So you can see that kind of interpersonal relationships or bad interpersonal relationships have a very bad negative effect on your mental health. And this is also a question. It's not all supervisors in academia are bad. You can see, at least if from the numbers, you can see that around 75% of PhD candidates are satisfied with their supervision. So I think it's not every case, but you can see that when you have poor personal relationships in any job, that it's something that will affect your mental health in most cases. And within this context that we advocated for changes to supervision, kind of many of us came from the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and we were successful in contributing to the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Guidelines on Supervision. And I think particularly Stephanie Gautier and Gabor Kishmihok, the vice chair and chair of our action, were asked to contribute to this kind of to the consultation that led to this document. So I think this was a great win for us, kind of that really this is something that has kind of a direct influence on how kind of these funding lines are awarded and what the rules that have to be followed when a fellowship is awarded. That we also reached out to Helke Hillebrand, who is kind of at the University of Heidelberg, where she runs the career service. And she was a co-author of Leroux's position paper on holistic doctoral supervision. And this is it was also around the same time, 2023. So we were not directly cited within this document, but you could see that kind of raising the awareness of an issue can lead to universities addressing this issue in some way. That responsible research supervision has also been dealt. I have a course on the pattern project learning environment that I gave at the University of Camerino last year. So this is available on the pattern website, or in pattern web. I can put into the chat. And when you have conflict in a research setting, this is something that very often causes friction and poor mental health outcomes. We kind of invited Susanne Teuber, who wrote a paper on gender inequality and bullying in academia, and who was dismissed from the University of Groningen in the years afterwards, to kind of relate about her experience with kind of bullying and harassment in academic settings and the work that she had been doing on that. And we also approached Morteza Mahmoudi, who had worked with her before on his experience. He was from a researcher from the United States who had also been very, very active in campaigning against bullying and harassment in academia. It's also something that we can see in Germany. There's a network against power abuse in academia. The UKRI in the UK has a policy on tackling bullying and harassment in academia, so that we see this is a very big topic. It's also the one where you very often see people who have been victims of bullying campaigning for years and years and years, kind of about kind of conditions in academia and trying to improve. And I talked with Morteza Mahmoudi about this, and that his position was that this is a topic that is more prevalent in engineering and male academia, but most of the people that I saw that campaigned over a long time were women on this topic, and kind of where they felt abuse. So I think this is really definitely a big issue in academia. On the other hand, that we also had a webinar up with Jurdis Česnik, who's the head of the Office of the German Research Ombudsman. And in this case, Ombudsman is Research Integrity Officer. But I think that many of the research integrity officers are really, many of the issues that you have with interpersonal conflict can be transferred into research integrity conflict. And that Jurdis made a webinar mainly about the handbook on whistleblower protection and research that she wrote as part of the European Network of Research Integrity Officers. And we also, Francisco Valente Gonçalves, presented on the European Whistleblower Protection Directive, and Francisco and Rumo also ran an Erasmus Plus project on whistleblower protection. So this is something that is a directive from the European Union, has to be implemented in national law and has to be implemented by all employers. So this is something that directly has to be taken on by academic employers, just like any other employer. We talked, I think, that research culture is a huge topic, and how to change research culture is not a short-term project, but it's also something where research managers are very often active. That the chair of our working group 1 on policy was Janet Metcalf from Vitae. She has since retired. I hope she has a very happy retirement. But Janet was very active in campaigning for improving research culture, researcher career development in the UK for many years as head of Vitae. And She talked about the research culture framework that she had developed within her work at Vitae. We also invited the Vice Provost of the University of Toronto to talk about his initiative to improve lab culture at the University of Toronto. And he is an anthropologist from his disciplinary and that he implemented a kind of a policy within the University of Toronto to improve culture within the wet lab environments. They had seen that within chemistry and life sciences, there was a problem with lab culture, and the leadership of the university intervened to implement guidelines and to improve the culture. But he was also very clear that changing the culture of an institution is a 10 to 20-year project. It's not something that you can do overnight, but it's something that that also requires initiative from the head of the university. I was asked in 2023 to go back to my alma mater, University College Dublin, where the research integrity team had started a research culture initiative, and in 2023 they ran a survey, and this has just been published a few weeks ago. And this is about the intersection of research culture and researcher mental health and well-being. But it's also quite clear that when you have leadership, such as that the then head of vice president for research is now the president of the university in Dublin, and that she had taken responsibility to promote this research culture initiative, which is still running. So it shows, particularly at the level of research, what we have done within Remo, there was a lot of bottom up, but if you want to change the research culture, it doesn't have to be top down. We all have a role as researchers and research managers to contribute to research culture. But if you want to do this as an overarching program, to have input from the leadership of the university to doing so is very important. And finally, that I come back to data collection and the evidence base. I think within the first year, we asked a lot of people to contribute about the data that they had produced, particularly Jan de Laster from the Max Planck PhD net, but she also worked with the N2 network, which is also from kind of the Leibniz Association and the Helmholtz Association and kind of other similar research networks in Germany to do similar surveys. And this was kind of really kind of from a bottom-up kind of initiative from a researcher-led organization, was quite inspiring and also kind of academically very worthwhile. We also asked Claudia Sarico, and who was then at the University of Minho in Portugal. She's now the Secretary of State for Higher Education in Portugal, and she had been at the OECD just before that because the OECD had produced a survey on academic precarity and working conditions in research. So we got in touch to find out who was the best person to ask, and that Claudia and Neda were very nicely agreed to present. And so this is really kind of to collect evidence as to what the extent of the problem is very important. The final message on surveys is that institutional SAF surveys don't have to be published to be important, that they can affect. It is important for institutions to assess their own working conditions and to act on those results. And so this is something that can be done in any institution, and it kind of is, and some institutions obviously already do it, but not all. And so to present something to the leadership of the university that shows that there is a problem worth addressing. We ran the staircase survey within Remo that has been published. I think it has now been published as a data set. And this was a huge collaborative effort within the action, and kind of produced that we had many comments, so that the thing that the one thing that must be improved from the point of view of researchers is management and supervision. So whether they mean supervisors or research management, I think, but this job security, workload, interpersonal relations, compensation and benefits, and so on. So that, I think the mental health comes down at 3%, but I think that all of these topics at the top is kind of really are the important ones. And I think this is something that also came through from the survey that we did recently. I will quickly go through the policy impact that we published a manifesto within the first year through a consultative process, and held the event as part of the conference on the future of Europe. And we had attendance of over 200 people at that event, the launch event. We contributed to the manifesto for early career researchers from the Initiative for Science in Europe. That we invited prominent speakers to speak at our conference, particularly the first conference that we held in 2022. We asked Manuel Heitor, who was previously the Minister for Science and Technology and Higher Education in Portugal, and has since chaired the expert group on the interim evaluation of Horizon Europe. And we also asked Slaven Mislienjevic from the Directorate General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. That Slaven told us that we probably wouldn't get mental health into the Charter for Researchers, but then 2 weeks later, Ursula von der Leyen held her State of the EU address, and she mentioned kind of mental health as a huge priority for the European Commission. And then Slaven sent me a message on LinkedIn to say that maybe I should look at this State of the EU address. And within the next draft of the Charter for Researchers included the words mental health. So I think this was some, and it was important that she also kind of indicated that they would increase the funding for mental health research. That the Charter for Researchers, the next draft that came out later in 2022, had kind of a sentence: employers should provide a working environment that promotes the mental health and well-being of researchers, including appropriate measures for preventing and tackling gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. And this feeds directly into the Human Resources Excellence in Research Award that is granted to research institutions within Europe. I think that I have come to the end of most of my talking for today, so that we have a Mentimeter question. The third one, I will have a look on my own to see kind of that the responsibility. I will move this. Can you see my screen, the Menti? Or okay, so this is basically, we see the responsibility being with policymakers, institutional leadership, research funders, principal investigators, and kind of research managers, administrators, in second last place to individuals. And I think this is something that I would, when I saw kind of we have included mental health in the European charters, what I saw, it was only on the institutions. And this is okay, they are the employers, but the policymakers and the research funders also have a role. And this was my experience from talking with Janet Metcalf, who was responsible for the coordination of the drafting of the Concordat in the UK, which is the equivalent, was something that was a shared responsibility across policymaking, institutional leadership, and individuals. So individual researchers, it's something, or the research community. So it's something where we can definitely see institutional leadership is now ahead. But I think this is something that definitely this is where I think it's important to see this as a shared responsibility, and that it's something where institutional leadership, that the higher up you go in the hierarchy, that the more responsibility you should carry. And I will return to that we also had, that our chair was involved in a consultation from SAPEA, and he got that we had the inclusion of researcher mental health and academic career prospects within the successful and timely uptake of artificial intelligence and science in the EU. That I spoke about LERU and the MACA guidelines already. And now I come to the last part, which is about research managers. And that, from my experience, I saw that a lot of the work that is being done within institutions on mental health was being done by research managers. And this was in addition to their normal roles. They weren't hard to be to manage researcher mental health. They were hard to run a doctoral program or an international office. But very often these were the ones who were driving the uptake of initiatives and interventions for good mental health and well-being within the institutions. And the research managers themselves are affected by the general stress levels, career precarity, and power imbalances within academia themselves. Most of the invitations I received to work with partners came either from research managers or early career researchers, and very seldom from the leader of an institution would say, we need to do something about mental health. And contact our cost action. That almost never happened. And so I think this is something where that if you have bottom-up activities, you can have impact, but if you have responsibility and you're in the leadership of an institution or a research funder or involved in policy making, that you have different levers to achieve interventions and to fund interventions, because very often as a researcher you can apply for a project to implement an intervention, but to have something, to have core funding within an institution, to have sustainability, I think this requires more than bottom-up action, and it means that you have to have leadership taking responsibility. There was very strong support from networks like EURAXIS and EARMA, and I also would like to bring attention to the two research manager projects within Horizon Europe, CARDEA and ORM Roadmap, and they both have, I've summarized the main points of both of these projects in one slide. They both ask for professionalization and recognition, capacity building and training, strengthening community support, developing a supportive ecosystem, integrating well-being into policies, fostering resilience and well-being. So across both of the projects, you have a very strong focus on well-being, addressing equality, diversity, and inclusion, developing an ORM charter. The survey from ORM Roadmap indicates high stress among research managers and integrating human resource management. So we see a lot of the research culture and researcher mental health issues being addressed by the two main research manager projects. And with that, I have the final Menti question. And so we have, you see whether I feel stressed in my role as a research manager is somewhere in the middle at the moment. I don't know how many people have. So 3.2, and I feel confident supporting researchers. Strongly disagree. I have it half in English, half in German. I don't know how this happened. So mental health is embodied. So it tends towards disagree rather than and feel stressed in my role as research manager somewhere in the middle so far. So that we see that most of the institutions do not embed policies, and supporting researchers' mental health issues is not